point out, show you what age can be.
Okay, this is February 16th, 1988. And this is Joe Todd, an interview with Garlen Eslick in Ingleside, Texas. Where were you born?
Milan, Missouri, 1922,
What month and day?
November
November
15th.
15th. Who was your father?
James, artist, Eslick.
And your mother?
Elizabeth Merlo,
M-U...
M-Y, R-L-E.
Oh, okay. And were your parents both from Missouri?
No, my mother's from Arkansas, Little Rock.
And your father was from?
From Milan, from Missouri. I'm not sure exactly what town.
Yeah.
I wasn't raised there, and
Okay.
I didn't hear much of the history.
Mm-hmm.
on
And how long did you live in Missouri?
I didn't. I was just. I was born in Milan, Missouri, and was a few months after that they moved to Oklahoma Territory and settled down around Bristow in that area. And
Why did the family move to Oklahoma?
I'm not really sure. I think it was because of hard times. It was back in there during the Depression era, and I think most everybody was, moving upstate and moving just where they thought the living conditions were better, and he settled down. I think in the oil fields, what brought him mainly to Oklahoma. He got in, in the oil field business, and he stayed with it and farming at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, we had many a hard year of farming there in Oklahoma. That was right after the Depression, and it was real hard times.
Did you go through high school at Bristol?
Well, I finished up the freshman year in Kellyville, and like I say, I had about enough farming the way we had to do it. It was sharecropping, and it just wasn't my bag, And so I told my father, I said, I just want to join the Navy. I had a friend, I asked him if he would go join the Navy with me, and he said, sure. And so we both asked our parents if it was okay, and Father told me that I was old enough to know what I wanted to do, that he would give my blessings and wish me luck. So I signed up in July, I think it was, in 1941, and there was an office in Sapulpa, which is a county seat, and they sent me to Dallas. They gave me 10 days to go back home, and then they sent me to Dallas to take my oath, and we went from there to San Diego.
Tell me about boot camp.
So,
Tell me about boot camp in San Diego.
well, coming right off of a farm, and then you wasn't accustomed to modern living standards, Of course, we goes in, and it was rough. To start with, I was more adapted than a lot of the boys that was in the training, because I was out on a farm and I was accustomed to hard work. Some of them just couldn't hack it, they'd fall out, faint, and you'd have to carry them off the field. But I made it through all right, but it was rigid training. You, like I say, it was up in the morning early, out to grinder, drilling all day, and the evening, a lot of times you had to, they called it in the evening you had to stand watches, and they called it, I think, a clothesline watch at that time. And you never knew from one minute to the next, whenever the petty officer would come around on duty and ask you one of the orders of the day, And if you didn't have that memorized, you had trouble on your hands, He'd give you a certain which uh, to quote, you know, and if you didn't know it, you better know it the next night. So.
If you didn't know the general order, what would
Gen-
happen?
Well, normally sometimes they gave you extra duty or instructed you thoroughly that you had better learn the general orders. And so therefore, you know, consequently you did finally wind up doing what they asked you. And like Mr. Keller stated, that you had to fix your sea bag and your hammock in a seagoing style. You lashed those up, and everything had to be done by a square knot. If you had put a granny knot on there, you had to unfold all your clothes from scratch, lay them out. They'd take and untie every one of them, just scatter them out there. Then you had to roll all your clothes back up, retie them, and that way you made sure that you tied the square knot the next time you rolled. See, all your clothes were rolled up in boot camp. You never folded them. You rolled them up into a small roll and then put them in your bag. You never folded anything.
What uniform did you wear in boot camp?
In the whites, undress whites, in all over, because it was hot during the hot summertime, and that's what we did wear, just undress. I don't know whether you're acquainted with the undress. At that time, prior to my time, they had a white dress uniform, the same as the blue with the collar and stripes on it, but they later canceled that and just had the dress blues with the stripes and everything on them. But they used the other one as everyday working uniform, the whites.
While in boot camp, did they instruct you on the world situation if that's a war in Europe?
If they did, it didn't seem to register with me. I don't remember any of the instructions or classes that might have been given. I suppose now in the modern times that they do that, but I figured that all the officers and everybody had their instructions and all, but I don't remember ever any classes being given to the just a regular sailor.
And how long did boot camp last?
I had 3 weeks in the South Unit and 3 weeks in the North Unit, and 1 week in transfer.
Now what's North?
Okay, the South Unit was just for the first newcomers. Then you progressed up to the other 3 weeks. Then you went to T Unit, which was transfer, waiting for assignment to ship, location, whatever.
And you were assigned to?
I requested. They wanted me to, you know, to go ahead with schooling classes, and a friend of mine was with me. We didn't want to. We wanted to go to sea. That's what we wanted, and we preferred. We did not want to go to school, and we requested to go aboard ship. So we waited around in transfer unit, and you had to watch the bulletin board each day to see if you were assigned. And sure enough, I was assigned to the USS Oklahoma, which is in San Pedro, and the other fellow, I don't remember now where. So he was on the Essex, wasn't he? He was transferred to the Essex, and of course that's where we both started off.
Did you request the Oklahoma? Or
No. I requested sea duty, aboard ship duty, and you didn't have any say-so of where they sent you, where they needed you.
How far from San Diego was San Pedro?
We went by bus. I don't recall now just how. I guess it's about 100 miles. I don't know just exactly the distance that it is. It's not far.
When you first saw the Oklahoma, what did you think?
Oh, it was. we had to go to by boat launch, motor launch. It was moored out away from docks, and by the time I got to the ship, I was woozy, about half seasick. By the time I got there, and then I looks up and had to go up a gangplank, going up to the deck, main deck. And by the time we carried our sea bags and stuff up there, we were all. I mean, it's a struggle now going around almost right straight up, you know. So we got aboard, and we stood around on deck waiting to see what division was to be assigned to, you know. And here come petty officer and said, "Here, follow me." So took us below decks, and I never. Now you talk about claustrophobia. You got it. Seemed like all the piping was just right at your head. Everything was just right, so close. You know, it was kind of eerie in a way. You didn't know what to think. You was being thrown into something that you didn't understand, and didn't know how long it would take you to grasp the situation that they was throwing you into. And but consequently, you know, everything. You know, the longer you stayed on one, the more you adapted to the situations.
And your quarters were located where when you first went up?
Out right where Mr. Keller was in the 3rd Division, and that was on the starboard side, aft after the stacks.
Which deck?
The 2nd deck.
Second deck.
Mhm.
Now, when you say second deck, is that 2 decks below main deck?
No, first deck down is the 2nd deck after main deck. First, second, and so you had to be close to where your battle stations were. They assigned you to the nearest place, you know, to be convenient to where your battle stations would be. And I was in a deck division, a gunnery department, and we had the anchor details and such, you know. And like we had, of a morning you got up, you know, and the first thing you had to do, your duties were to, they would hose down the deck, wet the decks down, then you got a holy stone. What they called it a holy stone, it was just a brick-like device with a small indentation in top of it to where you set this swab stick in the top of it back and forth 20 times on each, and you had to go in unison with the guy next to you. So you got in a row, in just a row, and they would call out stroke, stroke, until you got so many strokes on this one section of the deck, then you would step up to the next section. And that happened for, like, say, about 30 or 40 minutes, whatever.
And you were, what, cleaning the deck?
That was part of scrubbing, cleaning the deck. And prior to, I can't remember the exact procedures, but then you had to go clean the brass work and the knife edges of your hatches. See, those hatches were steel, and they would rust in. You had to take crow's cloth or steel wool and go around and clean those to rust, keep the rust down on them, and keep those hatch edges from rusting. I mean, keep them clean.
What was the object of that?
So,
What was the object of cleaning the hatches?
well, that's part of Navy procedure, cleanliness, everything. If they didn't have stuff, you know, things of that nature, then you would have a sloppy ship. So they were. I mean, I loved it. I thought it was, after I did get accustomed to it, I didn't think, I'll step back a little bit. We left San Pedro for Pearl. We got there and we had liberty, and then I don't know just how many days we would stay in port. We would go out for gunnery practice. I was in a 14-inch powder handling room, below decks. We would go out, we'd train for a week at a time, firing at towed sleds. They call them sleds. They were targets, 8, 10, 12 miles, right on the horizon nearly. And they would fire the tows for target practice. And they would all compete, these battleships would compete for, and they see if they get an E on the stack or whatever, you know, for efficiency or target rating. I mean, efficiency rating. And they was really proud of their gunnery.
Did Oklahoma get an E?
So,
Did
yes.
Oklahoma get an E?
They did, but I wasn't on there long enough to really know just what, you know, how the standings was in the efficiency ratings of the battleships. So I know that when we did go out, sometimes, you know, we'd go out in formation. It's a beautiful sight you ever seen. A lot of times at night. In peacetime, you know, the lights on them didn't mean anything. Go out there and all the ships would have the lights on their island structures, everything. It was just a sight to behold at night. You know, the lights glittering off the ocean. You know, you couldn't understand why any nation on earth would try to, you know, attack a thing like that. You know, such a mighty weapon. I'd call it a weapon for a country. You know, but they did.
Whenever you were on Liberty, what was the reaction of civilians in Hawaii to the military?
They were, I'll put it this way, we weren't welcome. They were just changing their island so completely. They'd go into town, you know, and it was such a military influx. You know, Army, Navy, Marines, you name it. They had their big naval bases, repair bases there, you know, and dry docks. And these big bouncers in these bars and stuff, you didn't say much to them, you know. I mean, if they thought you had enough drink, you didn't go back for another one. you went back out the door. But anyway, I really think you can understand their position, really can. And it's hard for any. It wasn't that just Oahu or Honolulu was just another small city, a crude city, and then throw all those military people in on it like that. It was rough, I'd imagine, for those people.
I understand there's a large Japanese population.
Yes. But I never noticed that many when it was just so many military people and the Hawaiian people, you know, that I never noticed really made the difference in in who was the majority there. And of course I did see and knew that there were Japanese there, but I didn't know what status or anything about them.
So, would you describe just your average day on the Oklahoma? What time you got up, what you did in the daytime, what time you went to bed?
Well, I couldn't tell you. It was 5:30, 6 o'clock reveille. You got up, like I say, you went ahead with your, before you ever ate breakfast, they soaked the deck down, and you hold a stone, then you went for breakfast, then you come back, you scrubbed the deck with a solution of soap or other. You're barefooted, you squeegeed down, you squeegeed the deck. That's taking the squeegee after you swabbed it and rinsed it down, then you squeegeed the deck dry and got all the deckings dried out, everything fixed, you know, and you went to your brass work and all this other stuff, you know, to get it ship shape again for the day. Then you went through, while you was in port, there wasn't that many training stations. You did have to stand watch. Whatever your station was, you stood that particular gun watch or whatever. You did have duties. But my principal duty then was in the vegetable locker detail. And like he was saying, it's mess duty. Well, this was the vegetable locker detail. That was part of the duties that 3 months of duty that you did when you went in the service. And I just happened. Okay, this vegetable locker detail was, we were preparing Sunday morning, December the 7th. We were preparing the salads in like lettuce, carrots, dicing up the carrots and slicing the lettuce and stuff up, preparing it for the salads and stuff for the dinner meal. So getting everything prepared, you had to start ahead of time. And of course the mess cooks, they were down preparing breakfast and all this other stuff. But you had different times to do all of this. So consequently, I got the duty of this boy named Tanner, and I was in the vegetable locker detail, and that's on the upper deck. I can show you on that diagram. And that's where I was stationed at the time the attack started. At 7:55. Jack plane flew over, strafing run. Immediately after, of course, the torpedoes didn't hit our ship until after I'd got down almost to my battle station.
Okay, before we get into that.
Okay, we'll back up.
Let's finish the day, the average day.
Okay, we'll.
Okay.
But then you went ahead and cleaned up, you know, all your pots, your stainless steel vest utensils, all this other equipment, and of course you would go on it like. Okay, then you would go down in your powder handling room. You would go through procedures, you know, we had these large, now, black powder, they charged for this 5-inch 14-inch guns was silk bags of black powder. Okay, for practice, we had practice bags made out of canvas and some other material in there that gave you about the same weight as the black powder bag. And you practice with those all day. I mean, at the time given, any given time, you know, or they would send you in. I don't remember all the details every day. I mean, you may be assigned to a working detail. You know, they may need somebody to haul on supplies or something. They'd set up maybe a 15 or 20 man working detail, and you'd go out and do what you had to do, carry in supplies for the mess cooks or vegetables or whatever. So you had to do all the things that pertained to your duties for that. And see, I wasn't long enough really to get out of my duty of mess cooking, as we'll call it. And I was caught right in the big middle of that.
And then what time was your bed?
Now, while we were in Pearl in dock, they would always have nearly every night, fitting, weather permitting, movies on aft end. They would set up the screen on the fantail, and of course a lot of times they had an awning stretched out over there. If it was inclement weather or maybe sprinkle something, you would be in out of the weather or something of that nature. But they always had movies that you could, if you didn't have liberty, you'd stay aboard and you'd watch this. Or you had, like we say, we had different conditions that were set for duty rosters. You performed like with 3 sets of, you know, set 1 or 2 or whatever, you know. If you happened to hit duties, then you stayed aboard at your particular battle stations. You didn't get liberty. But like I say, if there was any chance of being attacked or in hostile waters, then they would set condition 2 or general quarters, and you stayed at your station. Sometimes you was on 2 hours or 4 hours, whatever they assigned you to. Normally it was 2 hours on, 2 hours off, whatever. If it was in battle time, where you would be alert without being on station at any one long period of time. But like when we was in Pearl, it was just routine. There was no really hurried up stuff about it. They didn't seem to be excited about any attacks or anything, you know. It was just peacetime, routine business.
Okay. December 6th. What'd you do? Saturday, December 6th.
Same day. Same thing that I did December the 7th.
Same routine.
Same routine. Same routine. Of course, I can't tell you when I was on liberty and when I was off. I mean, that'd be kind of hard to recall back. I mean, just when. But best I can recall that I had the same duty the day before, on December the 6th.
Were you aware of the Japanese buildup?
No, sir. Was not.
You had no idea.
I had no idea. I like I've read in 2 or 3 places. I didn't even know they were mad at us. I hate to quote something like that, but that's, I mean, I didn't know we were even in a situation with Japan that would call for any alertness of any kind.
So, beginning of morning, December 7th, what time did you get up? December 7th.
No, I couldn't tell you exactly what time the reveille was. That's so far back.
Were you allowed to sleep in on Sunday mornings?
No, normally you had reveille. Normally you had reveille.
Did they have reveille on Sunday morning?
Yeah. Well, you always had reveille because people had duties to perform. See, and everybody had. Of course, you could lay in a lot of times. You know, I mean, there was relaxation time. You could, but you had to make those bunks up. Your bunks had to be made up. seagoing style.
Now,
Everyone,
when you say
every day.
seagoing style, what is seagoing style?
That's later during the war. Well, at that time, that was with your sheets and your blanket made up and stretched in a uniform manner. If you had a sea bag, it was all, or a hammock, it was rolled and stacked into a hammock bin, as they called it. And everything was put away for business. I mean, in case it had to be. Nothing could be scattered around. And like when their mess tables and everything had to be put up at a certain time after you ate at each meal. They were strung up on some little saddles or hangers. That was for safety reasons. That's to get them up out of the way, and they would swing. They would swing with the ship's movement. They almost stood still. The ship moved, but those would stay fairly stable. See, they were designed as such. And, okay.
So, you had...
As far as times and stuff, I don't remember
Okay.
reveille and...
So, what was the first duty you had
On-
December 7th, Sunday morning? What were you doing?
At that morning, that's what I had to do. When they had reveille, I was up in the vegetable locker detail. That's the place I went. That was my duty at that time. But later on during the week now, sometime when I would get this done, of course, we always got up and, like I say, and holystone the deck first. Then if we had time enough to prepare the dinner meal. See, after all this, we would. But Sunday we did in the holystone that morning. See, we went ahead about our details and went right on up.
Where is the vegetable locker located?
Where I can show you, it's just to.
Yeah, we'll look at my map.
Yeah, I'd have to show you on the diagram on the ship's decking.
And you say you were up on deck?
Yes, I was above the main deck, main deck.
Okay. And what were you doing up there?
I was in the vegetable locker, preparing the Sunday dinner vegetable, the salads and all this other stuff, carrots, dicing carrots, and lettuce, preparing the lettuce, cleaning, and the general food preparations.
And you were up on the main, I guess.
Yeah, it was actually a caged in. It wasn't completely encased. It was more or less a screened in area, heavy gauge screened in area, and you had all that. Yeah, it was fairly open.
And what happened?
Okay. We're in the middle of, best I can recall, we were dicing carrots. This boy Tanner and I. And all of a sudden, heard this roar of an engine. Looks up, and all you can see then is just puffs of smoke coming out of the wing areas off the plane, and seeing splinters. I mean, seeing everything, where the shells were hitting. You could see that something was really definitely hitting the ship, and then all of a sudden this boy that I was working with slumped over into this stainless pot, and he just almost ripped him in two. And I knew then they sounded, the officer of the deck run up and said, "Man all the battle stations on the double." They sounded general quarters.
What did you hear in quarters?
Well, I don't want to repeat exactly what I did hear. He said, "Man all battle stations on the double." Said it's a real thing.
Will you tell me?
Yeah. I mean, this is the best I can recall it.
Okay, go ahead.
The first person that made this announcement was...
Oh, that's all.
Says, "This is... Man, all battle stations on the double." Well, that wasn't stern enough, strong enough to get the people to move like they were supposed to. So this, I believe it was a Marine officer of the day, come running up. Anyway, it was an officer. Run up and announced over the PA system, says, "Man, all the battle stations on the double." Said it's a real thing, no shit. So don't let that go in that.
No. Okay.
Now that's the best I can recall it was said, and I wouldn't want to, you know.
And then, what's it?
I made a dash, jump, and of course, I told you this strafing run, I made a run. I think you turned that off.
Yeah.
I made a run from a battle station, which was 14-inch powder handling room, below decks, and just before I entered the magazine, powder handling room, we took our first 2 torpedo hits. And I managed to go ahead and get in the handling room, and the ship began, the ship was shuddering. It just shook all over, you know, and you were wondering what in the world was happening. You couldn't figure it. It didn't register. Even then.
Port or starboard side?
It was on the port side. They was hitting us from the port side. We were pulled in around Fort Island and heading out, and they come in from, the torpedo planes come in from over Fleet Landing.
So you were on the port side, the same side the torpedo
I was in the middle. At the time, I was up on the spud locker, in the vegetable locker, that central part of the ship up high. But when we got hit, I was down in the powder handling room, midships, and just nearly to it.
How many decks down?
I think best I can recall it's around 4 decks, 4 decks. And
is that below waterline?
yes.
So, what?
So I managed to get into my powder handling room, and by that time we had taken 2 more hits. I think we got hit. I think 5 torpedoes hit us all told. And by that time we were really beginning to list heavily. The lights all went out. Couldn't see anything. But anyway, there was a 2nd class petty officer. I can't remember his name now. He had fell down the sloping decks, and it either broke his leg or hurt his leg bad. And he couldn't get up, and he hollered for help, for somebody to help him. So another fellow and I, a barber, can't remember his name now, it's been so far, helped me lift him back up, and some other fellows took him and put him through the hatch. Just as they got him in the middle of the hatch, the ship completed this roll and caught him in the hatch. That's the last I remember, until I came to myself, you know, and was hollering for help. I remembered.
He was caught in the hatch?
Yeah, yeah, that's the last I remember. He was trapped in the hatch when it rolled.
What were you thinking this time?
Well, at the time we were helping this other fellow. We didn't know exactly what our situation was going to be, and the ship was at a pretty good on a pretty good heel then. It was going over, and we didn't know what was going to really happen. Whether we was going to turn upside down, we didn't know what was happening. Other than we knew that the ship was, you know, really trying to turn turtle. But I was thinking, oh, the only thing we was thinking about right at that moment was trying to get this boy up in the line, somebody help him get out the hatch, help him get out the top side. We knew that it had to be a abandoned ship, you know, because the ship was sinking. We were going over, and nothing was ever said about abandoning the ship. And Oliver, see, we didn't have time to even dog our hatches down for watertight integrity. It was just, you know, so fast and that was one of my duties, is to dog the hatches down. And just as I got in, we was taking all these hits, and you couldn't do it. The hatches were so heavy then, you know, but you couldn't have closed them if you'd have wanted to. And the dogs was all in different positions. You couldn't have dogged them down if you'd have wanted to. But anyway, everything went black, and that's I don't know to this day how I wound up where I did. I don't even know where I was at really when this sailor came to me with a battle lantern, and I was by myself. when I came to, I realized, I guess I had been unconscious. Best I can recall. I must have been, because I don't remember a thing until I was, you know, spitting salt water and oil and everything. My eyes was just like burning out of your head, you know. I mean, salt water and oil and everything you can think of, you know, debris. And come up fighting for, you know, try to stay above water. And I remember I panicked. Just momentarily, I panicked and hollered for help 2 or 3 times. And then you come to realization it's not going to do you any good, you know, and you accumulate some, you know, sense of, you know, trying to reason out what's happened and what to do. Survival. So I stood, I don't know how long, waiting, you know, and of course there was bodies all in the water and, you know, debris. And there you was, you standing on the ceiling, on the piping stuff in the ceiling. The deck was at this position. Now you talk about disorientation. It was, and you couldn't see anything. You could just touch your face like this, and you never knew your hand was there until you touched. You know, it was that dark. And so I felt around there, and I couldn't feel any place at all opening. Now, even if I had, I wouldn't have. If a place had been dogged down, I could have never gotten out because I didn't have a wrench to open the dogs with. You have to have a dog wrench to open them. So I just waited. I sat there and waited. I don't know how long it was. Really, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, or maybe better. I don't know how long it was. Something come up. A light come up out of the water. Just a dim light. It was one of the old battle lanterns. They had, I guess they hadn't renewed the batteries in them or whatever, you know, to keep them updated. And they were dim. It was a real dim light. There's a battle lantern that hangs on the bulkhead for situations such as that. And this fellow come up. He got right in my face with it, you know. And I startled him as much as he startled me. He said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, who are you?" Back to him, you know. He said, "Well, I believe he said his name was Young. His name's on that list there, but I couldn't swear to it to this day what his name was." It came back, and I told him who I was, and he said, "Is there any way out here?" I said, "None whatsoever that I can find." I said, I've felt around in here. I said, I've whenever direction I know, and I can't feel anything. And we tried, we couldn't find anything. So, well, we'll have to try to find ourselves back to where he came from. And they was at that time there was several men more than what was got out with us. I mean, there was 11 of us. It was finally taken out of this one compartment. But there was more than that to begin with. I don't remember the exact amount. I think at one time they might have been around 15 to 20. But they all went to separate ways trying to get out. And we sat on this one. It was just a small area. I found out while we were in there's one older seaman, petty officer in there that knew, had been on the ship long enough, and he knew where we were, just about where we were located. And he said he explained it that it was a fueling hatch. It come from topside down into the fueling bunker, the tanking systems. He said, and that goes right straight out to topside, but you have staircases. You have to, like when you're going down, you go down this way and then go around, go down, back around, and down, like this all the way down. So he said there's a possibility of diving out. The ship was settling in the water now. See, we were up high enough. We kept this one lantern turned off as much as we could to preserve it. Then he explained that now we'll take off all of our clothes. We'll rip them up and make a rope. We tied knots into all of our skivvies, everything we had, made a rope, made sure it was stout enough. Now this wasn't my suggestion. It was one of the other older men's theories on what could be done. So he said what he was going to do, that he's going to wrap this around his waist, tie it around his waist with a loose knot. He was going to go on down, and he explained it to us how we knew when we would hit top side. Said you'll go around from deck to deck, said possibly 3 decks. You'll scrape that deck. It'll be linoleum. It'll be smooth. When you get to top side, the top deck will be of wood. Said you dig your fingernails into that. If you dig your fingernails into that main deck and feel it's wood, going out, untie the rope, kick yourself off. Just keep kicking yourself off till you come top side if you can make it. May God bless you. He tied the rope around his waist, went down, and he never come back. There was 2 of them that did it, best I can recall. I tried it. I went down, I know, possibly 2, 3 decks. And by that time, see, the air was getting thin where we were at. You just couldn't get enough oxygen in your lungs to, carry you too far. I go down and I tried, and I knew that I couldn't feel wood. I mean, in my mind, I didn't think I'd gone far enough to be on top side. So I made myself back up where I started, and I was my lungs were just bursting the time I got back, and I wasn't going to try it again because I knew I'd already tried it one time. No use me trying it again. Another guy tried it. He came back. So we decided then the water was rising too high in there. We'd better conserve oxygen.
The ship settling.
Oh yeah, well you could feel it. I mean your water was coming up. See you may be down here resting on a beam or something, and you can feel the water then coming up. You can feel the ship settling in the mud, settling, and the water kept coming up. So while we had this battle lantern, batteries were good. We searched out a place where we could, possibly the last resort, we could go in and hatch yourself down if necessary and stay there the remaining time. So we found that we were adjoining the compartment D57. We didn't know it was D57 at the time, but we knew it was a peacoat locker, lucky bag as they called it. So we decided that we'd stay out there as long as we could stay. As long as the water wasn't up above the hatch going into the peacoat locker, the lucky bag, we would stay where it was at. Because if we ever got in there and dogged that hatch down, we were limited on the time that we had left. Because it was a small compartment filled with peacoats. And so we stayed out, I don't know, like I say, time meant nothing. I mean, it was just forever, it seemed like. It didn't seem like we had ever, I mean, it was just, where you were thirsty, your mouth just felt like cotton, your eyes were burning out of your head, your ears were full of oil, your mouth, you were burning, your skin was burning, and because by that time I guess your system tries to fight off anything like this, and all you thought about then was things, would you ever get out? Would you ever see your families again? First thing, you think about is home. And would you ever see your brothers, your sisters, your mom and dad, and do the things that you always did, And those things entered your mind pretty heavily. So then the men were talking a little more than they should. So this one older fellow, he said, okay, we're going to have to only one person at a time speak, and then speak very rationally. Said, every time we're talking, we're using oxygen. So let's just hold it to a bare minimum. And so we began, one fellow knew the Morse code, so we began to diddy-did, da-da-da, diddy-did, SOS on the bulkhead with
What was it using?
with a dog wrench. They found we had a dog wrench after we got into the lucky bag. See, well, I'm going to step back here a little bit. The ship began to settle in the mud pretty fast. It was got up high enough to where the water was running into the lucky bag, or in the compartment that we were to go into. So we figured, well, we could let it run in there for a little while, but then we didn't want it to get above the hatch level. So we decided after a while, that we had waited long enough, so we all filed into this lucky bag, slammed the hatch closed. We thought we'd had all the dogs dogged down properly, but one dog was reversed, and we didn't want to by this time we didn't know how high the water was on the other side then, the time we did all this. We was afraid to open the hatch back up to straighten this dog out, so we went ahead and risked, thinking maybe, well, maybe there wouldn't be enough pressure on the other side to cause any leakage, so we just dogged out what dogs was proper on the door, set in the proper angle, and so we had dogged those down and left that one undogged. That was our big mistake. Because whenever we stayed in there, of course, there was a few things, conversation. We could hear the people next to us. There was, I think, 7 men next to us, and we could hear the workmen. Of course, before this, while we was all in this other section, we could hear guns, the early part of the attack taking place. Then they come back again. We knew that whatever it was, it back happening again. And there wasn't much, I think a lot of the ships was really firing, and there was explosion. We couldn't tell exactly what, because there was always explosion stuff, extra explosions from magazines and stuff, from ships that was damaged, and torpedoed. See, the West Virginia, it had take right to stern of us, it had taken, it was still exploding everything about it. So we were listening to all of this. We could feel the heavy explosions, and of course we didn't know what all damage was being done. We didn't know what was happening, that they had done what they did out there. It was unbelievable. And of course, like I say, then we listened to all this, then we finally decided to go into this peacoat locker, and we dug down, and we stayed down. We began to tapping out the SOS, taking turns tapping out SOS. And we decided, we would talk to the people. One person would talk to this other people in the other compartment. There was one section that we could hear in another compartment. They were hollering in. We knew they were alive. Then later, nothing. The water got into them and drowned them, evidently. But the 7 in the other compartment we was talking to, they said that there was workers trying to get into them, and they were trying to drill into them then. And they had killed 2 other boys with torches. They burned up the oxygen or something, or caused a flash fire. And the time they got the 2 boys out, they were dead. So they decided they had to go with air hammers and chisels. They took a drill and drilled in through the bulkhead. When they got the other people out, they started on ours. They hollered in. If I'm not mistaken, it was Julio de Castro, the chief yard shipper, that hollered and asked us if we could stand in the oxygen. Well, we were in pretty deep water then. See, it was still, the pressure on the other side of this hatch had begun to buckle in this hatch. We tried to stuff peacoats, anything in it, to keep this water from spraying in. It just shoved it away, so much pressure, it just shoved it away. Well, we was able to hold it back somewhat. And so they asked us if we could stand any loss of oxygen. You hollered through and asked us. Said, well, maybe a little. Said, we're all, of course, at that time we were really gasping. We didn't have much longer really to go. And of course, we knew that we didn't have any alternative but to say, go ahead and do what you have to do. So they told us, now stand clear. Said, you're going to get a shrill whistle. Said, we're going to drill a hole through your bulkhead. And when we do this, you're going to get a shrill whistle. The pressures will be equalizing from one compartment to the other. Said, and the water, of course, when they did this, it did just exactly as they said. A shrill whistle. Then the pressure from the outside of the bulkhead becomes so great on our hatch, the water will really begin to pour in. Then before they was cut through this hatch, they cut. I don't know how long it must have been. Cutting through with chisels, through nearly 1/4 inch steel, it takes an awful long time. And they finally beat the thing in far enough for us to start going out, but the water was running out where they were. And we were, about 3 feet, you see, 3 or 4 feet from the ceiling at that time. And we all got out, they got us out, and we stood on an old boy's back. And they hoisted us from one section, height level, to the other. We were all just as naked as a jaybird. And of course, we were just oil, just solid mass of oil, and red as beach, you know, from salt water and then oils. And you could see the concern on these yard workmen's face, you know. They would tears in their eyes, you know, and they'd wrap us in raincoats, and put us in a motor launch and gave us a small cup of orange juice for dehydration, because we hadn't had a thing, you know, for 28 hours. And they took us from there to the hospital ship Solus. We entered the a little room. We took off our raincoat. Well, this one fellow that took us in there said, "Just take your coats off." And he took all of those old raincoats off because they had oil all over them then. He took them with him, and here come a nurse in. Here we all are, stark naked, see, and we jumped and hid, you know, as much as we could, and it really got to her, you know, and she said, "Yeah, men," says, I said, I appreciate your modesty. I said, "I'm a nurse." I said, "I've been handling survivors. You people," said "this hurt me as much as it is you." Said, but she did. She got a bunch of sheets and stuff, you know, and we were wrapped up in sheets. Then they sent a bunch of nurses in. They took gauze and, you know, alcohol and whatever, you know, whatever they had to do to get this oil out of her eyes and her ears and her hair. And we had to take a real hot shower. Gave us some special stuff to get cleaned up with. It took several tries getting all this stuff off, you know. But, they doctored us up and treated injuries, small injuries that we had, you know. Or some of them were a little greater than others. But, I stayed, I think it was 4 days I stayed on the Solus. And I was transferred over to the sub base.
Okay. Before we leave that, what were you sitting or standing on when the water was rising in that peak?
I don't know. Piping or possibly ladder. I mean, you know, the ladders where you go down from one level to the other. But it's kind of hard to say what everybody was really standing on. I mean, there was different stuff in the water. You know, you had debris and bodies and everything. You know, you just tried to keep in a place that was where you could keep footing, and you never knew what you were standing on. I didn't even know where I was at, really, other than just what this petty officer had told us.
Did you think you'd get out?
Well, I had hopes, but the situation looked hopeless. I mean, really. I mean, I couldn't see any way on earth, because I knew that the ship had turned upside down. I knew that, and I knew there wasn't any holes in the bottom of the ship to get out. So you see, I did know the situation I was in, and what chance of survival I had. I mean, it was just almost a hopeless situation. But you always had that thing, you know, of hope that you might, something happen, that some miracle that happened, that you'd make it.
Whenever you
But I was prepared. I mean, I wasn't, you know. I think everybody in there had really adapted to, you know, to the situation. That if they had to die there, they had to die there, and there was no panic. There was no more. I don't know of a soul in there that made any complaints, or was any sobbing or or anything that showed that they had any fear. It was strange. I mean, I guess every man, you know, really whenever the chips are really down, you have to adapt to that situation, and I think that's what they all did.
Whenever you talked, what do you talk about when you were in
Well, no, like I say, when we all got together, this happened pretty quick. There was a lot of joking going on, you know, about this or that. I don't remember all the conversation, but there was, you know, talk about, you know, for a little while, you know, one trying to bolster the other's, you know, hopes a little bit, and each one trying to make the other feel that things wasn't that hopeless.
Yeah.
But then everybody knew. So it was kind of hard to, I don't remember really any one conversation that was out, that was a standout to me, you know, to remember.
Whenever you first were taken off the ship, what was your reaction when you first saw daylight?
Okay. It was one of the worst sights, baddest sights I've ever seen in my life. The whole harbor was still aflame. Every ship out there that was sunk or had been hit, most of them, well, some of them were still smoldering, some were afire. Water was still burning. The oil in the water was still burning. Ford Island was a total, I mean, they annihilated it nearly. You see, that was a seaplane base, like where they had the seaplanes and reconnaissance planes and all this. I don't know what all facilities they did have over there, you know, fueling systems and all this other necessities for naval servicing. But it was all gone. I mean, everything was just shambles. The ships was all sunk, turned over, burning. You look across the bay there at 1010 dock, where, you know, the Pennsylvania was, you know, there everything was burning, you know, destroyers. I mean, you could look over there, and of course I didn't know what all was happening. All I could see was smoke, smoldering, fire still burning in places. Of course, they were still fighting it, working at it, and I think they had most of the major fires on the land lock. They had pretty well, but it was still smoking and smoldering, and it was a mess. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't think, you know, that things could turn around that quick from such beauty to such an awful sight. You know, it's just you couldn't get it to register. And even, of course, I'll got back to this later, you know, on return back into Pearl at various times.
Now you mentioned the man from New York, Joe, what's his name?
That's right.
The man from New York?
Joe Hydrusko.
Tell me that he was in a motor launch?
Way I understand, he was in a captain's gig. Or, well, anyway, an officer's transportation, you know, like a gig or a barge. But I think it was the gig. And I think he was the coxswain that operated a captain's gig. He was patrolling and picking up, he asked permission to use this vessel for going around picking up survivors, and they gave him permission. So he took this launch and was picking up survivors in the water, going from place to place wherever he seen somebody that needed help. He would pick up those people or render aid. And as he was passing the Oklahoma, this is what he told me. He said he heard this rapping noise. He heard this rapping. He knew then that there was somebody still alive in that ship. So he went to, I think it was a naval officer somewhere, and reported this. And they contacted the yard workers, civilian yard workers, and they sent Julio de Castro, got his crews, and they worked, I think, 30 or 40 some odd hours non-stop, never, with no rest, through all this other, you know, explosions and everything, working on the top of that Oklahoma trying to get us out of there. They started from there, and I don't, you know, you just have to get the story. I have the stories that was given by the families and Julio de Castro, just what procedures he took and the time he started, what he went through. But I understand that he did go through a lot with the a lieutenant, I think, in the Navy was one of the rescuers. They stayed with it through the whole ordeal, and some sailors, then the civilian yard workers that knew shipwork. But I think there was a petty officer that knew the ship details pretty well, and he directed on this particular ship. He directed the yard workers where, you know, where the like freshwater tanks or the bilge compartments, various compartments where they could go, you know, the least likely place to get in trouble. So I do not know all their names. I did hear, you know, some of the procedures that was taken.
Why did the Oklahoma capsize and West Virginia didn't?
Possibly, now I don't know. Possibly the way it was hit and the difference of the location where it was, and the amount of torpedoes, where it was struck, where it flooded first, and whether they were able to counter flood compartments, you know, to compensate for this or that, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know just why it turned turtle and West Virginia nosed it. But,
and you were on the Solus, and could you see the Oklahoma from the Solus?
no, I don't think I didn't even look to see. I wouldn't even look at it. I wouldn't even look at it. I don't know why.
What were you thinking of the Oklahoma this time?
What do I think about the
No,
Oklahoma?
when you were on the Solus.
Yeah.
What were you?
Well, you know, I thought it was a horrible thing, you know, to happen. I mean, there it was the day before, a beautiful, I mean, a fine fighting vessel. I mean, that anybody'd be proud to serve on. Then go by it, look at it, and all you see is just the bottom section of it, you know, the hull sticking out of the water, you know. That's something you don't, you know, forget. You know, I mean, it's a hard thing to visualize or realize what you would really thinking. You know, I mean, it's just still your mind is really numb. Still yet 3 or 4 days later, you know, to what you couldn't even believe what you're seeing. The impact really didn't hit for a while. Just the amount of damage that they had done. Of course, when I got on the Solus, you know, none of this was explained what happened until I got on the Solus, you know. Then the story was unraveled in just what really took place. They told us as near to what they knew happened as they could tell us.
What they tell you?
Well, just that the Japanese had attacked it, and we could see what happened. I mean, they just told us that what all they had hit, the Hickam Field, Ford Island, and all of our other air bases that we had there, they had just, you know, completely destroyed all of our air bases. And of course, they wouldn't reveal too much to you. But I mean, the officials wouldn't tell you anything. It was none of your business. I mean, they didn't want none of that stuff to get out, how much damage had really been done. This was all just scuttlebutt, as they called it in the Navy, something that wasn't sure. I mean, was come down and wasn't official, it was scuttlebutt. And this was just word to mouth from people that you were talking to at the time.
So from the Solus, where'd you go?
Sub-base. I was assigned, we went over there. The first thing we did was to start painting windows with black paint. We painted all windows on buildings over there with black paint to keep light from shining through as best we could. I mean, just painted them completely black. And other duties I had to stand guard duty at the sub base, going down into the sub base itself. They had the Oahu railway that come down in there on flat car and carrying torpedoes and stuff, supply ammunition stuff for these submarines. And you had to stop. First off, though, I had duty prior to this guard duty. I would go down to sub base, take palm leaves and stuff, and cover, lay them over the submarines for camouflage, to where, you know, if they did come back, you know, that they wouldn't see these submarines. It would just be, you know, that we did this. And then I would stay there, I don't know, a week or so, about over a week or something. But when I went over there, I didn't have anything on but what they gave me on the Solus. I had on my underwear, a pair of dungarees, and a pair of Navy issue shoes. That's all I had. No other clothes. Didn't even have a mattress. I didn't have no place to sleep. Now, I may be using improper grammar, but that's all right.
Where did you sleep?
Well, it's what I was going to get to. It was becoming dark. No one was to move. You didn't go out after dark at all. No way. So they took us over later in the evening when I got off the Solus, and they took us over and put us in this barracks. And we looked around for something to sleep on. All they had was these bunks with just little cot outfits with these springs on them, you know, just little woven springs on them, and no mattress on them or anything. And I didn't have any change of clothes, no soap, no way to wash up, no shave equipment or anything. So I told, they had a barracks leader, I mean, already petty officer, somebody in the barracks, and I told him, I said, there was all 4 or 5 of us come over there at this one time. This when we first went into sub base, and he said, well, you're going to have to go over to the supply building and ask for health and comfort. Just equipment enough, you know, to get along until you could be given the regular issue. So I said, well, I'm not going to, we can't go out there in that dark. And I was by myself. I was going to, at this time I had to go by myself. And because I had asked for this, you know, and I told them I didn't have anything to sleep on, mattress or anything. So they said, well, go over here. So, and I said, well, I can't do that without, I said, it's getting dark out there. I said, and they're shooting anything that moves. And they would. These guards or anybody patrolling, MPs, SPs and everything, they'd shoot you on sight. I mean, you did not. So he gave me this little slip of paper. I didn't have a flashlight or anything, see. And it was about, I'd say a block and a half down. And he told me how to get down there. I didn't remember exactly where the building's at, but he told me how to get there. And I was apprehensive. I just knew I was going to get in trouble. So went about a half a block, and 2 of these shore patrol jumped me, and just nearly, I mean, they had those guns stuck in my face in a minute flat. They began to question me. Here I was in just dungarees, you know, and a pair of shoes, no cap or anything, no Navy uniform other than just I was there. And they didn't believe me. They didn't believe me. I said, what can I tell you? I told them what I had been sunk on the Oklahoma, and I just was rescued from the Oklahoma to come off the Solus. They assigned me to the sub base. I said, now, don't have anything to sleep on, or don't have any health and comfort stuff? Yeah, you know, that's the way they put it to me. I said, well, would you do this? Take me back. I'll tell you back where that's just half a block. Let's go back up here and get this verified. I said, okay, let's go. So we went up there and they told us. So they escorted me down to this place. I got my stuff. They brought me back then. Said, don't you venture out again at night. You get shot. So, like I say, we painted windows for 2 or 3 days and camouflaged submarines, and they put me on guard duty at the gate going into the sub base. And this railway, the locomotive engineer and fireman, they would come in. They expected me to know who they were every time they come through, and it was dark. See, so at night it was dark, and so I would stand out. I'd wave them down. They told me to wave them down, stop them, and make them get off the engine, come down, advance, and be recognized, and then they could get back on the locomotive, and take it on through. So I did this a couple of times. Well, once, then the second time they come through, they didn't want to get off. Did that? They said, "Hell, man," said, we just come from here not too long ago. Said, "You ought to know us by now." They started. Well, and I waved them down again, and brought my rifle to ready, and told them that they was not to move that engine on through. And they just started raising Cain. This engineer started raising Cain with me. And the officer of the deck, also on watch, he was standing on the other side of the building, and he heard the commotion. Here he come running. He asked me, he said, "Sentry, what's wrong? What's the commotion here?" And I told him what the situation was. He walked up to that cab of that engine, brought his .45 out. He said, "I'm going to give you just a matter of a few seconds to get off that locomotive. You and your helper, or you're dead." Boy, that old boy, they just fell off that dude. I mean, they come off there and apologized. He said, "Now, next time you come down here, if this gentleman's on duty, if this sailor's on duty, guard's on duty, and he tells you to stop, and you don't stop and he don't shoot you, I'm going to shoot him and you." That's just what he put it to me. So they said, "Fine." So every night they come through, or when they come through, they always got off that locomotive, advanced to be recognized, and didn't say a word. They just got back on the locomotive. You tell them proceed. But you know, that's, and you could just set hour on end at night, and you could hear rifle fire or rapid fire, or maybe anti-aircraft start firing. It just took one person to shoot, then the whole outfit would start opening fire. They'd think they seen planes coming in or anything. They'd just start shooting in the air. It was just that jumpy, and you just didn't venture out and do anything.
So, you went aboard the Saratoga?
Right. I went aboard it about January the 16th or the 17th, the best I can recall. About the middle of January.
What was the reaction of the other guys there when they found out you'd been taken out of the Oklahoma? Did they have any reaction
No.
to you?
No, not at that time, because there was so much stuff going on that was minimal. It didn't really occur to them the impact of what the person might have went through at the time. I know the nurses and the corpsmen, they were shocked or dumbfounded about how a person could go through such an ordeal and without losing his sanity completely would be beyond them, you know. And of course, that's about the only thing. When you use regular duty, no one ever mentioned, very, very little, because there were so many things that had happened that was, to them, possibly was as bad, you know. And they had their troubles, and you had yours. That's the way.
So what were your duties aboard the Saratoga?
I was on the 3rd Division Gunnery Department on it also, but I was on a 5-inch gun mount.
And the Saratoga is a carrier?
Aircraft carrier, CV-3. I didn't ask for duty. I mean, I was assigned. As the days went by, whenever the Saratoga come from stateside, It pulled into Pearl. I was assigned to the Saratoga. I went on it about the middle of January, best I can recall. And I was assigned to 3rd Division. And it was also you had anchor details, and you stood helmsman's watch, or whatever your rate called for you to do, you did. Myself, my gun station was, you qualified nearly every position on a 5-inch gun mount. If, say, a 5-inch is your gun station, you qualified on nearly every position on that. Pointer, trainer, first loader, second loader, powder handler, or whatever the case might have been. Or fuse setter. On early models, they had fuse setters, a manual fuse setter. You know, you said I was a fuse setter on it for a long time. You know, and that was my duties on there, or pointer or trainer. We changed duties on that. You know, I would one time, maybe a week, I'd be pointer, trainer, I wasn't quite really large enough to handle the first loading situation, which the ammunition. I was large enough, but they didn't think, you know, they thought they needed a large, burly guy, you know, if they could get him, you know, to handle the ammunition. I was a powder handler, or, you know, or case handler, then pointer, trainer, fuse setter.
And you were aboard the Saratoga when I took the torpedoes?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
We got aboard I went aboard her in January, and we had went right to sea, and we got out about 500 miles. I'd say nearly 500 miles. It took a Japanese sub-torpedo. Hadn't even got to our destination. We was heading for Midway, I think it was. But anyway, we took this torpedo and had to come back for repairs. Had to go back to stateside and got repaired and come back. And then in August of 1942, well, of course, we went back. We went to, now this other one was off the Solomon Islands where we were hit. As I recall, it was in August 21st, I believe, in 42. We took another Japanese torpedo on the starboard side. We hit on port side one time, and then starboard quarter, right just forward of where my gun station was, on 5-inch gun mount. Then, of course, we had to then come back. Went to Ulithi, then Pearl for repairs again, and that's when I asked for transfer, wasn't it? No, in December. The Liscum Bay, in December, at some point in December of 43, of course we went out, we got repaired again from 42 to December 43, went back out and stayed in Noumea, New Caledonia, and all these other little places, you know. We'd go out and shell and do these things that we had to do to take island to island, and air sorties, sending air cover for various service, you know, I mean, landings and what have you, until the Liscum Bay, I think it was Liscum Bay, was sunk, and we brought the survivors back, the survivors that came off the Liscum Bay back to stateside, and I asked for new construction there, another ship that was being built in Quincy, Mass, U.S.S. Hancock. And
why did you ask for new construction?
I don't know. A friend of mine, it's Johnny, it was our best man at our wedding. He and I had decided, well, we just, you know, did a different bit of duty, you know, and we saw this new carry being built. Well, we just try out new carry, you know, just something you wanted to do, you know, and if we didn't get it, we didn't get it. But we were both gave it what we asked for, and we wound up in I had to go to the Fargo barracks. That's where I had to report to, and I had duty serve out of there. I stood shore patrol duty, such as while I was there in Boston. And what was the name of that street that that big strip?
Square.
Huh? Scully Square. Scully Square in Boston, Mass. That was one of the. I think every other store or building was a bar. I mean, every type of a situation here, rough and tumble. I was standing. I had this. There was two sailors on one block. I was on another. Two sailors on another, and here I was walking this one beach, in front of these, back and forth, as a shore patrol duty, and here come this girl up. She was with two Marines. She come running up to me, called me everything in the books, kicking me on the shins and slapping at me, and I grabbed her arms and twisted her arm behind her back. Told the Marines to take her on before she got in trouble. I'd have to call the police and have her hauled in if they didn't take her and get her out. And they took her, and they thought it was funny, but they went ahead and took her and started to take her off, and they turned her loose, and she came back. Evidently, some shore patrol had done something to her prior to this, and she thought evidently I was that person, and she was taking it out on me. She come back and she started to kicking and screaming at me again, and I grabbed her arm and just threw it behind her back, and just bent her plumb over, and told her, I said, "You're going to have to get this girl out of here." So they did. They finally got her and hauled her off. And of course, that's the thing you had to look forward to. So I had to close a bar up that had closed up 1 o'clock sharp in the morning. And I walked in and told them, all the sailors in there, all the military personnel, I said, "Bar's closed. Everybody, rank up. Let's go." Everybody got up, even the ones that was polluted the highest got up, didn't say a word. They, "Okay, boss," Out they'd go, But one old boy just sat there. I walked up, tapped him on the shoulder. "Now you're going to have to leave now, sailor." I says, "Bar's closed. Just the military." And he told me where I could go right quick. Well, I hadn't really served too much shore patrol duty, and I didn't know quite how to handle that. I had my club and all, but I didn't want to hit the man with that thing, It was just, wasn't in my nature to do a thing like that. And I said, "Well, now look," I said, "I don't have any trouble with you." I said, "You're going to have to leave." I said, "They're going to close this thing down, and you can't stay in here." He said, "Are you going to put me out?" I said, "Well, if I have to, I'll have to try." I said, "But I prefer you leaving peacefully, and I don't have to hurt you. It'd take 10 like you to hurt me." Oh, and he jumped up, as if he's going to tear me to pieces. I just walked outside. I said, "Wait just a minute." So I walked outside, took my whistled it. Two shore patrol here, they come running down the next block, and they come up. We all walks in there. "Yeah, you couldn't do it by yourself, could you?" He walks out, he goes out just as peaceful as a lamb, But anyway, that I stayed there until my ship was ready for launching. Of course, I had. Let's see, I went to Naval Training Station, Newport. I went to Newport Naval Training Station. It was cold, so cold, and I had to take a rifle group. They assigned me to take them out on a firing range, and we had to pack all of our gear over there, and we like to froze to death before we got there. And of course, that's the thing I had to do, and I had to drill the boys, and like a drill instructor, and I'd never done anything in my life. The only drill that I'd ever done was in boot camp, and I was told how to what to do. And we had to train these boys inside a Quonset building types, because it's cold out, at thin, of course, and we did outside, but mostly we. And I had to learn all of that. I told those boys, I said, "You're going to have to do what I asked you to do best you can." And of course, we went ahead and wrestled through it, you know, and I got by just fine. Cooperation from a lot of good sailors, and of course I met the wife here. We bought the Seven Seas several times over. it was a good place to go, you know. We were there nearly every night. I went over nearly every night. We'd go out dancing, or we'd go roller skating, you know. At that time, you know, things were a little different than it is now. We would roller skate or go have a few drinks, or dance, you know. It was just, had a lot of fun. And but I met her in A1 cafeteria.
That's where.
That was in Newport, Rhode Island, right downtown, right on, well, it was off Spring Street, Thames, Washington Square. I can't remember those streets. She does. She lived there. But we go in. I goes in and sits down, and I ordered something that she didn't think it was good for on the menu, and she suggested something else. And I thought, well, okay, if that's what you want me to eat, I'll eat it. And but anyway, she told the girl, this is what she tells me, that the girl she was working with said, "See that sailor there?" When I walked indoors, said, "I'm going to marry you." And so we started going out together then, you know, of course, just every night. Then we would go, we'd close up the roller rink, and I'd take her home, you know. And but then I think, Betty, wasn't it, was transferred to
Fort Devens.
yeah, Fort Devens. It was an army base there, and I think we were the first Navy group to be assigned there. And that's where Daddy and I and Warren, of course, Warren Mass is where we got married. Lowell Mass. I'll get it all right pretty soon. She just guided me through it. But, then, of course, we launched the ship later. This is all, everything, a lot of things happened in between this. We launched the ship, went on a shakedown cruise to South America and all in there, and then come back to Boston for refitting. I mean, you know, they find out what all it was needed, you know, and send us back to Boston for complete refitting and everything. Then we left out of there and went through the Panama Canal to the war zone back to Pacific Theater. That was in October, wasn't it? September, October. 44. And September. And we got out in time. Of course, we went through a lot of. Then the kamikaze began working pretty heavy, and so we took 2 kamikaze at different times, 2 kamikaze hits, and one of our own bombs, one of our own planes. It went over the shipping that was in the harbors, and they were bombing shore installations. Now this was on the Hancock, like I got on it. Shore installations and shippings in the harbors and stuff, and this one plane tried to drop his bomb, and it wouldn't come loose. It wouldn't drop. It was a large bomb, and the ship was really, you know, hit pretty bad in places, and he was able to fly the ship back. And he tried 2 or 3 times to dive on enemy shipping to dislodge the bomb, and it wasn't doing so. So nothing to do with it either. Come back to ship, and he suggested that the pilot suggested that he make a splash landing alongside the ship and be rescued by another vessel, and which other planes were doing. See? But he was injured, and they didn't want to let him take a chance on losing him, unable to survive long enough to be picked up. So the captain come on and said that they were going to try to landing aboard ship. Said it was a risky situation because the bomb liable to drop once he hit the deck. There's already been several attempts to drop it. Might have been in release position, just gradually, and then a slightest nudge on that landing would dislodge it on board ship, you know. So they decided to go ahead and bring him aboard, landing. He come in, made the perfect landing, taxied forward, and just they fold the wings back, you know, like they do on carrier aircraft. And those wings come up into the up position and come back down into the locked fold back position, they jarred the bomb loose on the flight deck and just disintegrated the plane and all the plane handlers that was around it. I think it was 70 some odd killed and 128 injured in that nature, a whole bunch.
What ship
That's
was
one
that?
of our own.
What ship was that on?
That was a Hancock. That was one of pre-commission when it launched in there in Quincy, Mass.
You won the ship when that happened?
Yes, I was on the ship. I was on it every time it was hit. It was hit 3 times.
Where were you when that bomb exploded?
I was a lookout supervisor forward on all 3 times it was hit. Kamikaze, the 2 kamikazes and the bomb. I was on the lookout forward. I supervised all sky lookouts, surface lookouts forward, and then there was another similar situation aft. But I was forward because I was the junior petty officer, you know, and I was assigned to this duty.
Tell me about the kamikazes.
It's I went through a lot of, I think, excuse me, everybody was more terrified of a kamikaze or a suicide plane than any action that we ever went through. One of the most nerve-wracking. You knew that when you saw that plane come through a cloud bank or come down at you, if you didn't knock him out of the skies, it was guided in. It wasn't like a bomb coming down, you know. That bomb just come right straight down. If he missed you, he missed you. But that pilot in there, he had only one thing on his mind, was taking out that ship and hitting it in a vulnerable spot. They knew where they wanted to hit. And they'd hit it. Of course, they'd hit any place they could hit on it, but if they had their choice, they knew where they wanted to hit. And the person said he wasn't scared. He was either crazy or just had nerves of steel, because I've never seen anybody yet but wasn't scared, you know, that wasn't just terrified at seeing one of those things come out of at you, you know. And you just couldn't keep your legs from, you know, your knees from shaking, or you just had to brace yourself on something. That's all you had to do. You was either sitting on a gun seat, you know, or you was acting, if you was loading ammunition or whatever, your mind was pretty well off of that because you was tending to your business. But if you was watching it in a situation where you was watching that, didn't have a gun in your hands or something to shoot back, you really had problems, mental problems about, you know, facing a thing like that. You couldn't fight back. All you do is sit there and watch them wait for your guns, take care of the situation. And so consequently, I think, was a little more aware of danger than the boys that were really giving them a workover. And I know whenever I reported this plane diving on a cruiser on our starboard bow, and our guns all trained over and opened fire on this plane that was diving on the cruiser. When we fired on him, when our ships fired on him, he come out of a dive on that, didn't drop his bomb on the cruiser, but he come in on our bow, hedge hopping as they call it, just weaving. And they'd hit him. He got down low enough that we couldn't train our 5-inch, and on our bow you couldn't train your 5-inch on him, see? So your 40 millimeter and your 20 millimeter is the only thing that could get with him. And they'd hit him, and puff of smoke would come up, go out. Puff of smoke, go out. You can see it every time they hit him, but nothing to knock him down. See, he just kept plowing in there. He come right in on the water nearly, and that's the reason why you couldn't really get a good, you know, volley at him to really, you know, you set up such a, what they do, they set up such a volume of flak or anti-aircraft fire that they have to fly through it. Well, you couldn't do that because he was coming in on your bow, you know, and you couldn't get all your guns trained on him properly. So consequently, he came on the end, and he come right up, raised right up off the water, and steadied his plane, and just dove right in on the forward elevator or the starboard catapult, the plane catapult, and tore out our forward elevator. I mean, and disintegrated. The plane skidded on. The bomb dropped there. The plane skidded on back into planes on the aft end of the flight deck just set fires. I mean, everything then began to exploding, and the flight deck, you couldn't see it. Old black smoke. The deck was on fire. The hole in the deck. The fire control business, you know, the men was out with their water hoses trying out there on the deck, you know, and the only time you could see the deck was when the water, the mist, the water would move the smoke, black boiling smoke up away from, you know, and that's, and this, it was April 7th, 1944, or 45, excuse me, that our plane was hit the last time. That's whenever Johnny, our best man at our wedding, was killed. We were hit, and he was in a gun captain on a 5-inch gun turret forward. And the smoke and fire was so bad that I could talk to the gun captains because I was the lookout speaker forward. And I told them that when they come out of the gun mount, it was getting so hot in there, they had to come out because the fire was just engulfed all around their two turrets. I said, now when you come out, I tried to guide them and told them to head toward the aft end of the flight deck. That was the nearest place out of the flames, because if they went forward, that was all on fire. Planes was burning. I mean, the bomb, where the bomb had hit and everything, they had to go toward the island structure. When they come out of the gun mount on the starboard side, they all jumped out of that and jumped, leaped on the deck and jumped overboard. Hit this fire and smoke, panicked overboard. Everyone that come out. And they trying to guide him out. He just wouldn't listen. I mean, it was just so intense that I guess, you know, their minds went blank, you know, they just jumped. And when they were burned, when they hit the water, see, they were already burned, and their flesh was just peeling off. A destroyer picked them up, picked Johnny up, I know this, and put him on the Battleship Washington, on the battleship. And I knew a quartermaster, a signalman, and I asked him if he would find out where Johnny went, if he was picked up. I wasn't sure, you know. And of course, it wasn't long before we was able to get the fire control and all this was able to get the ship under control, and we was back in action again. Well, of course, we had this damage, but we were back, you know, maneuvering. And so I would have this signalman to signal over, and he found out that Johnny was one of the ones that was picked up, and they transferred him over there onto the battleship. And every 4 or 5 hours, maybe, I would go to the signalman and ask him if he would call over. I explained to him about he and I, and he said, I understand. And there wasn't anything out of his pocket. I mean, there was no, he wasn't jeopardizing any, you know, security or anything of this sort. He had permission to do it. And they would say each time they called over there, signaled over, they signaled back critical. Critical each time. So that happened on April 7th, and he lasted 2 days. He lived 2 days, and on the 9th, morning of the 9th, he passed away. I had them call over there on the morning of the 9th, and they said deceased. Then we had to come back to Pearl for repair. We went back to Pearl for repairs. And that's when I asked for a survivor's leave, and it was accepted. And I come back, you know, got my 30-day leave of absence, picked up my wife, and we come back to Pier 91, Seattle, Washington, for 1 year shore duty. I didn't ask for this. See, what I asked for, I had went through the channels asking for my survivor's leave. I told the proper authorities that I had never gotten my survivor's leave. I did find out later that I was entitled to a survivor's leave, so I asked for it.
What's survivor's leave?
Any disaster that you were lost a ship or survived from any marine disaster, or like a loss of a ship or whatever, you know, and you survived this, you was entitled to a survivor. If you survived some ship sinking or whatever, you were entitled to a survivor's leave, which was 30 days. Now this is what I understand. And they wouldn't even listen. They wouldn't even listen me out, you know. I didn't talk to the executive officer, which was Commander Pride aboard the Hancock. But I talked to his office. And they wouldn't even say, you might as well hang it up. Said, you're just no good at all. So I met a chaplain on the flight deck one day. I asked the chaplain, sir, I said, could I have a word with you? He said, any time, sailor. Young man. And any time at all. He said, how about now? I said, that's just fine. I explained to him, and I said, now my request is, I would like, if I am entitled to a survivor's leave, I explained to him that I was on the Oklahoma, and I was never given a survivor's leave, and I understand that I was entitled to a survivor's leave, and he said, you're right, you're correct, and he admitted this. Then I said, oh, now what I would like is to go see my wife and be with my wife again, and get my 30-day leave, get it past me, and then I could come back, and I wanted to come right back to my regular duty aboard the Hancock and serve out the remainder of the war and finish the war out. He didn't. He said, I'll see what I can do. And he said, and then before he left, he said, may God bless you. And said, we'll see you around. Come to services. And so rocked on. We was in Pearl, and they had repaired the ship and was taking on supplies, ammunition, and general supplies. I thought, well, didn't go through. I'm not going to hang it up. So just about a week, I guess, before, I don't know how long they did stay in Pearl after all this happened. But the word came over the PA system, said, third class petty officer G.W. Eslick, report to the executive officer's office on the double. Now, oh no, what have I done? I haven't done anything to be called to the exec's office for. Normally when you was called there, you was in trouble a lot of times. I mean, without any reason. So I down know this Miller, he was a yeoman on duty. He said, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Kept on at me, until he wouldn't tell me what trouble was, And so pretty soon he said, now you can go on in, said, the exec wants to talk to you. I was just nervous. I didn't, what in the world is that, Come in, he sat down, I saluted him. He said, have a seat. And he began to tell me how he appreciated what all I'd done and didn't complain about anything. And it was an oversight on the Navy's part that I hadn't got my survivor's leave, and that they were fulfilling their their part of it, that I was to go back. I was going to go back to States for my survivor's leave and report back to Pier 91, Seattle, Washington, for 1 year shore duty. I said, no, sir, I can't accept that. He looked at me real stern, and he said, what do you mean you can't accept that? And I said, well, that's not what I asked for. This is not what I want. I said, what I requested was 30 days leave of absence and report back to my ship, this ship, for the remainder of the war. He said, you don't have anything to say about it anymore. He said, it's out of your hands entirely. He said, you have earned this and you're taking it. He said, it's out of your hands completely. I said, with all due respect, sir, I said, I would like to decline the shore leave. And I said, I asked for this other, and I would like the request be granted. He said, I'm not going to argue with you about this. The decision is final, and you are to do as the orders are set down. He said, report to the yeoman outside and he'll give you your orders. You are dismissed. So I got out when I talked to Miller, which is the yeoman. Then he began to razz me about, now I was the only man to come back to the States. And from then. And they put me on the old Sea Flasher, an old transport. I didn't think we would ever hit stateside, boy. Oh man, they put me on duty. I had to stand duty while I was on it, and on an old 3 or 4 pounder or something on the stern of that thing, you know. All the time I was coming back, you know, I just stayed after. I didn't even care whether I did anything else. I just stayed on the platform most of the time to eat and go to bunk, stand and watch on it till I got back to the States.
How long that trip took?
I think about 10 days or something. I don't remember now just how long it was. It was an awful long time. But I reported, what time, what was it, Betty, whenever I reported back to... See, I was mustered out in September of 45.
July.
It was July. It must have been July, August,
You
September.
reported.
Yeah, it must have been
Yeah.
July. It was July. And so I served. I went back, you know, and my wife and I then we stayed there, and we went back to and finished out our time in Seattle, Washington. We had an apartment on Magnolia Bluff. And I had duties in transfer barracks, they called it. What they would do, they would bring the new people in, or didn't necessarily have to be new sailors in, or recruits, or whatever, to be assigned to various duties, and they were to stay in these barracks until assigned to certain ships or whatever. And we had 2 barracks, this second class and I. And we had a chief warrant officer in charge of the several buildings there, and I got to know him pretty well as far as a man. And he was a decent sort of old boy. I can't remember his name right now, but anyway, he was tried to be a lot of influence on me, trying to get me to stay in the Navy. And of course, we would set up our details, working details, so we had to sign working details, all of this, after these group of people, that sailors that come in for various working parties, details of cleaning up, you know, policing the grounds, or whatever details that they might call up from the headquarters, and want a certain, so many man working detail, then you had to sign these, or you had to sign watch details and what have you, you know, and keep the list of the men's names, or when they were transferred, they were scratched off the list and added to by some replacements. And this is what went on all the time we were there. What this second class and I would do, we would catch a yeoman or somebody in the clerical field. Rather than, those old boys would be glad to take our duties on typewriters. I didn't know how to type. I just hunt and peck on a typewriter, and it was hard for me to sit down and make out these lists and keep these transfers all, you know, up to date, you know, without really struggling. And so what I would do, we would just find some of these men in there that were in the clerical field, a yeoman, and ask them if they'd rather go and work in details or stand their duty at a desk. Boy, they all opted for the desk, see, so we could go on Liberty every night, or, I mean, shoot, we had it made there, you know. We stayed there all day, and then we'd go Liberty at night, every night. So I was able to be with my wife every night, and so we had a beautiful apartment there. We could overlook the bay. It was beautiful at night. And it was in, of course, you know, when the war, VJ.
Yeah, we should have VJ
That
Both of us were on the base.
we were both on the base there in Seattle. I can't remember exactly where where I was at.
I was working
You
in the
you was
PX.
working in the PX, but I can't remember exactly where. I was in one of the barracks. I was in the barracks somewhere and during the day, and I was on duty. And they announced that the war was over. What they had done, you know, the war was over in Japan, and everybody just went wild then. And of course, we went down the PX. We celebrated, and really glad. And I was, of course, I was one of the first. I had so many points. You know, I was one of the early outs. I had enough points. You got out on points, and I had enough. I was about one of the first men out, and of course got out and went back. We tried Oklahoma first in the oil fields. My brother worked as a pumper on a lease, and he had a bunch of work, and he hired me. There was no work. You know, things were bad. And anyway, I wasn't qualified, you know, for anything other than farm work, and I wasn't about to go back to farm work. No way. That was out entirely, unless I just emergency, you know. And here, I had a wife, and I had to support her now then, and no way was I going to go back on a farm then. I doubt if I could have drugged her on a farm to begin with. But I worked in the oil fields with him about a couple of weeks, I suppose, and somehow or another I had decided to hire out on the railroad, and I applied for this job. I went, where was it, Tulsa, wasn't it? And Santa Fe, they had an office there in Tulsa. I walked in and asked them if they had any job openings. They said yes, they had 3. They looked on their list, and they had 3 machinist helper positions, and there were Albuquerque, New Mexico, Clovis, New Mexico, and Amarillo, Texas. No, Winoka, Oklahoma. And Albuquerque. 3 places: Albuquerque, Amarillo, and Winoka, Oklahoma. Well, I'd seen enough of Oklahoma at that time, you know, hard times on the farm and everything. Farming was bad. And so, well, we studied, and well, we'll just take Amarillo. Just out of the blue, they put us on a train. Right, you went by, yeah, we all both went by train. And wound up in Amarillo. We had a hard time. I was out of work about as much as I was on, because every time the economy changed a little bit, or the company's money faded a little bit, they would reduce forces, cut forces according to what their income and outlay. So that's the way they did. They didn't care about how you know, about the person. Of course, you can understand that they couldn't keep you on if they wasn't making money with you. So they would lay you off. And then you had to find something, anything. And just, people just wouldn't hire you if they knew you was just cut off in forced reduction. They knew that you'd quit them and go right back to railroad, see, as quick as you was recalled to service. So they just wouldn't hardly hire you. And I would go to work for just anything that would hire me, you know, steel construction or anything. And of course, we left, when I left Oklahoma, we went back to Newport, Rhode Island. My first time I was cut off, to back up a little bit, and went up there, and I stood in unemployment lines, you know, and I took anything that they would give me, and I worked at a creamery, a dairy farm, and I worked at Aquidneck Island Creamery and a dairy farm that was outside of town. We liked to starve to death, and she was carrying my oldest son, and I was making how much, about I think it was just minimum. I mean, it was not enough to keep us. I didn't have enough money to feed her and me take a lunch to work. That's how bad it was. And that's the way it happened until I would put farm machinery together, put it together. He was the like distributor for farm machinery for that area, and he would get all the stuff in. I'd help put it together when it come in out of crates, and then he would take it out and distribute it to whoever had purchased the machinery. And then I had all manure out and spread it in the fields and all this other stuff with the spreader and all this. Just anything to make a living. So Santa Fe finally called me back. We got here, got to Amarillo, and the job wasn't there when I got there. The master mechanic had sent me a card, said that they had a job opening for me if I wanted to come back. We hocked everything we had, everything. I mean, we had enough money to get here, but we didn't have enough money to live on after we got here, so we hocked everything, boots, clothes, coats, clocks, everything, in order to get by. And went down to get a job, they didn't have a job for me. Said they were sorry that, and I told him what he'd done. You guys said, you can't do that. You can't do that. I said, you called me off a job I was working. I was able to support a little bit. I said, but now you've called me here, I don't have any money. I said, I'm broke and no job. Now what am I supposed to do now? I said, you can't do that to a person. So he finally opened a position as a laborer. Of course, then we would off and on, I was off and on. Of course, I was able then, I'd worked enough, you know, I would go to that unemployment office and I would take anything, you know, and other people stand around, they'd draw unemployment. I didn't like that, so I would take anything that they gave me. And I made enough to live on for a while, but it was hard going. But every time you come back to the railroad, you had to work for, it all depends on when you started. If you started on the 1st or 2nd or 3rd of the month, you had to go a whole month before you got a paycheck. They held back 2 weeks on you, see? So you starved. It was hard. And we did this, I don't know, half a dozen times, seemed me like, and they like starved us to death. I didn't know what I was going to have to do.
What were your main duties with the railroad?
Sir?
What were your main duties with the railroad?
I started out as a machinist helper, and was laid off, you know, and I'd come back and I hired out as a pipe fitter helper, labor. I worked as a coach cleaner, worked in the car department as, you know, just various labor's job in the car departments, cleaning box cars or whatever they wanted you to do, you know. And then they'd call me back to electrician helper. And I started working with no electrician. I'll never forget it. And they told me to report to an electrician. The only electrician there he was a headlight inspector, what his classification was, on steam locomotives. And said to report to this Mark Wilson. And he was over in the blacksmith shop at the time, rewiring a circuit that was having a problem with. And I went in, and he was up on a ladder way up high, and I hollered up. I said, I'm supposed to report to you. I said, I'm your new helper. I touched the ladder, and he thought I was going to climb up, you know, up with me. He said, oh, you stay down there, says, just one at a time, one on the ladder at a time. So I said, no, I wasn't coming up. I just wanted to hold the ladder for you. Oh, okay. He said, I'll be down pretty soon. We'll get things straightened out. We'll get acquainted. So I worked them, and the unions were coming in pretty strong, and they were required, if an apprentice or somebody had been an electrician before, if he come in and requested a job and you hadn't had in your 4 years indenture as a helper, after 4 years they could have set you up as an electrician. But in that meantime, if there's anybody come in that was a qualified electrician, they had to hire him, and you was gone. So they did this on me a couple of times, you know, and it hurt. And but in the meantime, of course, they didn't want to let me go, so they would hire me or put me over maybe as a coach cleaner or a laborer, and that's where I did most of my laboring work, is fulfilling the times that I was cut off of my regular jobs. They would sign me to the job and then bring me back to the job if it ever opened up again. And so it happened on. I finally worked there long enough that I established enough seniority that no one could hurt me.
And how did you work for the railroad?
30, a little over 30, nearly 38 years.
38 years.
I retired in 1982, 37 years or something. We had, wife didn't like it there. I didn't like it. The winters were so cold, and I had a problem with, there's a lot of pollen. I had a lot of respiratory problem with, it turned into an asthma problem. And I was hurting pretty bad. I got into running in I think it was about 80. I started running these 10K races. And all the old boys down there thought it was nuts, get up there ready to retire and then start out running in races and stuff, And I've been at it ever since, running. But anyway, I retired, and we decided we'd get out of the cold climates, and maybe and wife, we loved it down here. We'd been down here a couple of times on vacation, and we loved it here. And we figured that we thought first that we might move back to Rhode Island, retire, and buy property there, home there. But we decided, well, we wouldn't better ourselves as far as the cold climates. They have longer winters, back there than they do normally in this part of the country. And so we opted by coming down here, and we bought a camper when I retired, and we decided we'd come down. We couldn't sell our house, so we figured if we couldn't sell our house, we'd buy this camper and come down and Road Beaches. We'd have our house up for sale, and we went out and purchased the camper and our house. So here we had the camper. So we come on down. We'll just wait a while to buy the house, and we just travel around down here. And we was here 2 days and bought this house here. And now we have a camper out here. We've never used it for one time to come down here. So we're enjoying it. We're enjoying it here immensely. We both love it, and we have not regretted our move.
Let me back up.
All
When
right.
you first saw the lamp in the Oklahoma, this lamp that came up.
All right. Okay.
When you said the lamp came up, where did it come from?
Well, he had. Okay, I didn't explain that very thoroughly on this. I'm not good at this, but as you can see. But anyway, the boy had all the hatches were underwater, below water level. He had to dive down underwater, go through the hatch, and come back up topside again. Dive down, go back up, and come up into another compartment. This is the only way he could, and every time he would come up, his light would come up, he'd naturally come up.
So his light came out of the water.
Right. And that's the thing that alarmed me. I mean, of course the light wasn't bright. It was just a glow. And that's the reason why when he come out of the water,
back on the Oklahoma and diving in it after it's sunk.
Well, we're back on another. I will. Good. Thank you for reminding me. Remind me again.
So
The lantern, you know, was so dim, you know, that he couldn't really see, but just an outline on me, more or less, you know, and it startled him as much as it did me, you know. Just seeing that come up out of the water all of a sudden, you know, everything as black as it was in there, and then have that thing to pop up out of the water, you know, it kind of startled you just for a second. Then he asked, "Who are you?" You know, and I told him I was going to ask, "Who are you?" It was just a reflex answer, you know.
You went with him back under
Yes,
where
yes.
he came from then?
He told me where he had come from, and it was other men that, being we couldn't go any further, we might as well go back there and try to figure out what we could do there, or if anything. And so we succeeded in going back. I don't know how long it took. I mean, under and over, you know. Of course, you had bodies, and, you know, every time you moved, you know, you had to shove something out of the way, some body or something out of your way that was floating.
What had killed most of those people?
Drowning, or you know, when it turned upside down, either obstacles flying around, or they banged their head on a bulkhead, or probably rendered them unconscious, or when the water went over them, it strangled and never did come out of it, or whatever. You know, it's kind of hard to say why there were so many of them, you know, but they were there, you know, and there was so much. You say you turned this room upside down, everything that was in here, it was loose, was flying around. You never know what might hit you, or.
What was the noise of the ship turning over?
Yet, surprisingly, I never really paid that much attention to the noise, other than the when the torpedoes hit, it was more or less a muffled, woof, you know, it's real. I mean, it was just shook you, just throwed you all over everything. It was the more or less the concussion, or the movement of the way it just seemed like it just picked the ship up, you know, and just shook it. And then it was settled back, you know, shudder, and then settle back. And then but the noise wasn't the ship turning. The noise wasn't there, other than just, you know, stuff falling around and clanging again the other side, and people maybe hollering or instructions or help or some of this nature, you know. The normal anxieties and possibly some panics, and that's about all your recollections are. Of course, you knew, you know, every time a torpedo hits, you know, there's no nothing like it. It's a little different than a bomb hit. A bomb hit is normally hits on solid surface. I mean, and detonates and spreads out this way. A torpedo hits, it goes through water and is a dull thud. I know I've lived through 7 torpedoes. I think if it was 5 that hit the Oklahoma, we got 2 on the Saratoga. So I do know what they feel like, and they are different than a bomb. I mean, altogether different. But the devastation is just as great. Of course, it's under your water line, and it's going to rupture everything from the outside in. See, where a bomb goes, explodes and tears up the inside and tries to get out.
Did you come back into Pearl Harbor and see the Oklahoma on its side?
Now I want to tell you about. That's what I want to get to. I want to get to her in a minute. But that's a strange thing. I wouldn't look at it. I may glance at it, but I would never comment on it. I never commented anybody that I never know. They might ask me, and I might tell them I was on it. But I wouldn't go through any details. I never went through any details with no one that I ever know of. I wouldn't talk about it.
Why?
I don't know. Just it was hard to hard to, to talk about something like that at that time with me. I guess there might have been other people the same way, but I just chose not to. It was so vicious a thing that whenever I did come back into Pearl, I come back several times, a few times that is, and each time I'd see that ship over there, I would see the condition, and see it, the oil still on the water, see the Arizona sitting there, and see the oil slicks and all the water, and still all that stuff around. The memories were still there. You didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to look at it. To this day, I couldn't tell you. Now, she reminded me to tell you, to make this insertion, that when I was at the sub base, they took me back in a launch over there and made me go back aboard it and go inside.
Does this have to be a big race?
No.
So you went back the same way you came out?
They made me go back on the board it and walk around on it and go down in, and I could hear the water sloshing, around in those holes. And you talk about something now that'll put it plumb up to here, boy, is go back where you really nearly met your time, come up again your limit. Then they have, that's like if you're on a pole line work on electrical gang or something, you burn a pole. What that means is your hooks have slipped and you burn that pole down, or you hit the ground or whatever if you've recovered or able to recover yourself before you hit, or you skin your legs all up, burn down a pole. That if you're in training on that electrician, he'll make you go right back up that pole if you're able, if you're not hurt bad. He'll make you go right back up that pole right immediately to make you understand that it's not that dangerous, and that get that fear out of your head right then, rather than stop and think about it. In fact, if you go. So they took me. Now, why they did it is only the explanation. I was taken back over there, is all I know. I'm not over on a launch.
How much time had you lapsed?
3 or 4 days. 3 or 4 days. I can't recall exactly, but they did take me back over there. And I didn't request it. I didn't request it.
What were you thinking when you went inside the ship?
I could just, think that there's other people, other men down there yet that wasn't as fortunate, Of course, while I was down there and trapped, I was thinking, at the time you could feel those other bodies, the men that were already dead, that they were the lucky ones, to get it like this, rather than to go through it like we would have to go, and then at an agonizing, slow pace, and then at the end not get out, but just wind up like they are. That they might be the lucky ones, and not you. And but whenever they took me back on there, you thought more or less not of what your situation was, but you knew that you could look down in there and see that know that there were other men down there, still in there, but not alive, but some of your Navy friends. I didn't have too many, because I wasn't on there long enough to really made any good friends. But you knew that those boys didn't make it, and they were still there.
Were there some pockets that did suffocate?
Yeah, would drown or suffocate. And some of them suffocated. The water rose up in their compartments, choked off their air supply, or drowned them before they choked off. Various ways that they, maybe some of them were injured and couldn't swim or couldn't float long enough, to stay above, keep their head above water. And I know a lot of them that when I was in there, if they had been hurt, somebody would have had to help them. There was somebody there to help them, see, possibly. But how long, we don't know. but that's what you think, you know. Of course, your mind goes back to where you were. I mean, you know what, that you were there. They just got you out, you know. That you had come out of there, out of that hole, and you was in one heck of a predicament. But your actual thoughts was, at that time, was the other boys that was still in there. And of course, there wasn't nobody alive.
Like Mr. Keller said, when he saw the Oklahoma, he cried.
I didn't. I mean, I was still. I mean,
Of
of
course,
course.
he wasn't on board.
Yeah. I'm not saying that I wouldn't have, or possibly didn't shed a few tears, you know. But when I went back over there, it was just a bad feeling, you know. Something you comrades, you know, they just didn't make it. Young boys, and was trapped into a situation that, and their lives were ended, and not even lived hardly, you know. Just life begin, and have something like that to happen. And like when I was in there, you know, first thing I thought of, you know, was would I ever, you know, do the things that I always did, you know, go hunting and fishing and you know, and the things that I normally did there around the farm, you know. That's the thing. Would I ever see my sisters and brothers and all this again, you know? That's the first thing that hits your mind. Begin to thinking back. Of course, you never, like I was telling you, you never give up really hope. But you know, down in your heart that your chances are very nil. That was before, you know, heard any rescue parties or any attempts to get you out.
Well, being in a capsized battleship is not the best place to be to track it down.
I wouldn't. I believe I'll go along with you on that statement.
Mr. Keller today said that when they came back in and he saw the ship capsized, he broke down and cried. And he said some sailor made fun of him and he turned indebted. And he said that's never happened. I guess they did it even on the Oklahoma. He said he's back there. And he said when he saw the Oklahoma land there, he just broke down and cried.
Well, I can go back into my Navy career on the like on the Hancock, mainly on the Hancock. That was one of the most terrifying ordeals. Was on the Hancock. It wasn't the torpedoes so much on the Oklahoma. I mean on the Saratoga, as was the action that we had on the Hancock. I can show you some of the stuff on that will raise your hair on your head, and it was bad. Yeah, and all, not just kamikaze. Now, whenever these Japanese torpedo planes were coming in right on the surface, and our fighter screen, see, they would send in so many planes at one time, the Japanese were, that their fighter screen couldn't get them all. The ones that got through, our ships had to get them, had to knock them down. So consequently, they would be some of them that get through our anti-aircraft and our ship's battery, and when they got through that, you was in trouble. Yeah. You were in trouble.
I would like to get you to show me on this.
This is the galley. It was up. I can tell you right in this general. You'll have to excuse me here. I've just about lost exactly. It was in an area, maybe in the locker here. You see, my station was number 4 turret, powder handling room. It was back here, so I had to go down below decks and come down here and get into this area here, and I'm not sure now where this sailor found me in what compartment, but we did come back to the compartment D57. That's in between this area right in here, and that's where we spent our remaining time, was in the lucky bag in compartment D57.
And you were in there 28 hours.
28 hours. Well, under all various locations in there where, you know, I'm not sure. I didn't spend this much time in compartment D57. I don't remember exactly how long in each place. Yeah, where I was at in that other section, I have no idea where it was at to this day. But we did have to dive through a few compartments in order to get back to this D57 location. And, now there's a fueling hatch in this general area. They come up the top side from here, somewhere in this area. This trunk, see this trunk? I believe this something to do with it right here.
And that's where
in this general area.
And that's where that guy was trying to get out.
Yeah, yeah. When you dive down, you would hit wooden deck. That's the way he explained it. That you could scratch the deck and you could find that the below decks were linoleum and the top deck would be wood. So that's the way he explained it to us. If we would know when we got to top side if we dove out.
And where were your quarters on the ship?
Well, I was in the 3rd Division. I was in the same place he was in this just below aft. I would have to see here on this. I don't know exactly what location, but it was right in 2nd deck. It's kind of hard for me to, with my glasses here, to locate that. You just have to just say, well, I was in the 3rd Division on that, you know, and let it go at that. And and now that's the Maryland. This is where they, right in this general area here, if what I understand, right in this area here, where it was removed in this location, general location. It shows a hole in one of the views where they pulled us out. But I know whenever they took us out, they carried us down to the lower section where the motor launch was, and put us in and took us to the Solus from there. But when you look over, when we come out, you know, everything was still just in a bad state of affairs.
How old were you when that picture was taken?
20, 21.
He's about 20.
What'd you do? Well, we had been at had we been at the A1 or the roller skating that night? It was roller skating. Is that thing? We went roller skating and got out. It closed down. We was getting ready to go home, and one of the short line buses, that's the city transit system, made us run there, and we were going to catch a bus. Normally we caught a cab, but that night we caught the bus. We're going to catch the bus, and so the bus driver pulled his bus up in front of this cafe right across the street from the roller rink. He gets out, left the engine running, sets his handbrakes, went in to get a cup of coffee until the bus filled up. See? Okay, here come 3 drunken sailors. He gets on, walk back. She and I sitting in the front, I guess 3 or 4 seats back. And
There was another couple on.
yeah, there's another couple on there. It just had come on, and well, there was more than that. There was
There was
2 or 3 other people on there. But anyway, this sailor come up to me, he was just walling all over me. Okay, sailor, your wish is my demand. Where do you want to go? That is my command. Where do you want to go? I said, I'm going back to town, downtown Newport. And let's go. He goes up, jumps, plops down in the damn driver's seat, close the doors,
all over the ground.
close the doors, turn the bus around, head back toward Newport. Boy, it wasn't but just a minute till every siren, every cop car, that side of the country was after us. Boy, and he kept driving, and he turned the corner. I don't know what street it was, but he
Right
turned.
up at Bellevue Avenue.
Yeah.
It's in a rich estate.
He turned the corner, opened the doors, and all 3 of them jumped out and run, left the truck running, moving, rolling. I jumped out of the seat, run up. I never drove a bus or anything before. I didn't even hardly know how to drive a car. I'd come off the farm there. Hell, I didn't. My dad owned the Model A, but I never drove it much. I didn't know anything about driving. So I just jumped in the seat, steered it over, and boy, by the time that thing come to a stop, every cop car in that country was piled on top of us, boy. There I was sitting in the driver's seat, and I brought it to a stop, put it in neutral, and cut the ignition off, and boy, and they yanked me out of there and shook me around like a rag doll, boy. And boy, they grabbed all of us. Well, how did they do this? Now, did they put us in squad cars? They took us in cars, didn't they?
Took us in squad cars.
Squad cars,
Jail.
and took us to the jailhouse, mugged us, fingerprinted us. Wouldn't take nobody's word what happened. Nobody.
We're all in separate cells.
And put everybody in separate cells. So I had to give all my stuff out of our pockets, put them in there, put them in a little bag, put your name on it, and she was really raising hell with them, boy. I was supposed to have her back, see, man, that was bad, and so they'd call each one of us out separately and interrogate each one separately. And everyone told the same story, see. If it hadn't been for everybody telling the same story, boy, we would have been in trouble. Boy, if there hadn't been a half a dozen on there, I'd have really been in trouble. And so they had to say, and Ed didn't even say, thank me, do nothing. I mean, they just gave her dang stuff back to us. And that was about what? That was about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning they turned us loose. And I had to be back to the dang base. And there I was in jail. Boy, that spooked me about as much as anything, I guess. And I stood there and I had quite a bit of money on me.
Yeah, you counted everything.
I counted every dime of that. I made them account for every damn dime before I ever put it in there. When I took it out, they said, "Here's your stuff." I said, "No way, no way. I want that dumped out here where I can see it. I want to count my money. I want to count everything I've got right there." That way, like catching a shirt down there. I've been counting out every damn dime, boy. It better been there too, boy.
Then it came out in the newspaper.
Yeah, come out in the damn newspaper. We didn't want it out. And of course,
Well, they didn't give any names,
No.
but my mother was reading it and going on about it, and me,
I know, but
I started laughing.
we had to give them a bad story about where you'd been.
Yeah, but she knew where I'd been when she read that article. I started laughing. Couldn't keep it straight.
Well, I know it's a bad interview, but
Oh,
you
no.
just have to accept it. That's all there is to it now.
This was a good interview. In fact, I thought this is one of the